Today I have been very reluctant to talk about Omega because I am currently working on a video all about combining the Speedmaster Professional with the Rolex Daytona. It's been a very fun exercise and I look forward to sharing it with you. Just so happened that today, the 5th of January, Omega has just launched the Speedmaster Professional Master Chronometer. Completely new update to their line. One of their most iconic, one of their most famous chronographs. It has to be discussed. At first, the only real external change we see is the updated bracelet. And if I could best describe this watch in a few words, it is attention to detail. What Omega has managed to do with this launch is take a step back and look at the best attributes that the Professional has offered and managed to do an excellent job with it. Not only will this watch appeal to the watch enthusiast, the vintage enthusiast, which we will speak about in a moment, it is such a worthwhile successor and a great update next to the previous generation. Let's focus in on the two models. On the left side we see the original model, on the right we see the update. Again, the only real defining difference that you can see at first is the change in bracelet. What blew me away the most, and might surprise you as well, is that when I looked at the front of the watch with a lot more scrutiny, I noticed 11 improvements. Not 5 or 3, 11. Number one, we see that the logo, the Omega symbol, the Speedmaster Professional has shifted upwards and the logo itself has been adjusted in size. Okay. Something important to note, only the Sapphire Sandwich variant of this model will be receiving an applied Omega logo. A bit of a loss. I'm guessing that the Sapphire variant is the flagship of the line, which is why we see a clear case back on that model and a solid back on the Hesalite model. Sadly, no applied logo on the Hesalite dial. Number two, this watch has what we could call a hybrid bezel, which I will address in a moment. Number three, the dial is stepped, more in tune with 60s references from back in the day. Number four, we notice that there is an improvement to the chronograph hand. The arrowhead is broader and it is closer to the minute track. Very useful. Number five, of course, we have the dot over 90. Now, linking it with the hybrid bezel idea, the rest of the bezel stays the same. So in many ways, it is still true to the modern bezel, except for that element, which is a bit peculiar, but the vintage enthusiasts will enjoy it. So it's blending this new and old together. Number six, we see a more pronounced winding crown. So it's easier to operate this watch, easier to wind, easier to use. I'm sure that'll be appreciated. Number seven, I may stand corrected on this, but it looks like the piston of the pusher is further out of the case. Easier to use and to operate. Number eight, going back to attention to detail, we see that all the heads where the sub-dial hands attached are in fact polished. If I'm not mistaken, the earlier pinions were painted over. We still see that the centralized hour and minute hand shares a painted over segment, but on the sub-dials, it's polished. Number 9 and number 10, we have a hollow end link and an articulating bracelet. This bracelet, if you're interested in knowing, is also a hybrid, a cross between the reference 1469 and 1479. Bracelets that were commonly used on the Speedmaster between the 80s and the 90s, if I'm not mistaken. A really nice change to this watch is the clasp. I always appreciate a simpler clasp that's streamlined, with an embossed logo. We've noticed that a few modern iterations of these pieces now have these logos set the way they are, and they look fantastic. A textured surface very much mirroring the vintage styling of those old references. Of course, most of us can understand that there is going to be much greater articulation with this bracelet on the wrist. It's going to feel a lot more silky, a lot more comfortable, especially with that articulating center link. The only downside to this bracelet, of course, is that it doesn't seem to have any micro-adjust system apart from the simple holes that you use to adjust the spring bar. It doesn't take much thinking to realize that this new generation is inspired directly by the Apollo 11th 50th anniversary Professional. It shares virtually everything. Even the case dimensions are the same, I believe. A stepped dial, pronounced crowns, dot over 90s, matching bracelets. Then we can start appreciating the real change to this watch, which is the Calibre 3861. A completely new movement. A hand-wound, META-certified coaxial cam wheel chronograph. 15,000 Gauss, anti-magnetic, 50-hour power reserve, and what is focused on is better finishing. A lot more attention is put into this movement. Now maybe this is just the Omega enthusiast in me talking, but it's very exciting to see the potential of this movement. Most of us who own these watches with coaxial movements know just how accurate and hard-wearing they are. So seeing how this stands up as a worthy successor to the 1861, it's going to be good to see. Along with these improvements, the prices of these models have been increased, and there are some variants with Sedna gold and everything else, which I'm sure I'll be linking some images on the screen. Most of us are focusing on the steel variants because that's where our interest lies. The question we now have to ask is, was it a worthy move adjusting the watch the way they did? I guess my main gripe goes back to the bracelet, where I was thinking they would be a bit more intelligent with some kind of modern amalgamation with hollow center links, making it a bit easier to wear and to use, still keeping it very true to the more modern standard. They have instead gone backwards to earlier past influences instead. Something very true that we see translated through the entire watch. I'm not saying that it's wrong or unimaginative. This watch didn't need all of these updates. The added detail just makes it a much more pleasurable wearing experience. And as a brand, we see that Omega caters to the entire community, which is great. Many who own this modern Speedmaster will be able to pinpoint all the minor details. So in a way, the owner, not only knowing that it's the space watch, also will learn all of the small details that made these vintage-inspired nuances all the more captivating. Very much like the dial to this watch, there is greater depth. And instead of this watch giving off the impression that it is a more mass-produced model, with all of these updates, again centering back to the beginning, detail shows that there is care. The more detail assigned to a product shows that there is more care to a product. And that is what ultimately gives us that lasting joy, wanting to own the product, and in the end wanting to stand by that brand and what they represent. In closing, these new improvements are fantastic. It doesn't go against the brand's identity, it solidifies it even more. It shows a different side to the Speedmaster. It gives the owner an impression of a watch that has lasted through the ages, and now also shares many small hints about its past heritage. This is a watch I would greatly consider owning. A Speedmaster has always been one on my list. This new interpretation is definitely one that has piqued my interest. They have improved in the areas that I felt lacking, namely the details on the dial and adjusting the bracelet, as well as including an entirely new bulletproof movement. We could say then that the new Master Chronometer Speedy is retro done right.